Hey everyone, welcome to this introductory video of EaselQA. So EaselQA is a end-to-end test automation tool which was recently open sourced and developed by Datafion. The application is available in GitHub. It can be downloaded and installed on premise. So I'm going to talk through this session on what is EaselQA, why did we build another test automation tool, and what are its features. And I'll quickly move on to introduction on how to set it up on your local machine. So let's get started. What is EaselQA? As I mentioned earlier, EaselQA is an end-to-end open source test automation tool. It supports mobile, web application, APIs, microservices, databases, and any other interfaces that you could think of in your enterprises. So it has a pluggable architecture where you can plug in any component within the test automation tool and could be used as part of your test flow. This is fully on-premise hosted solution and the data stays with you. So a lot of times internal applications could not be tested with say a SaaS based application because you have to expose it to publicly. So since EaselQA is on-premise application, you could easily test any application that resides within your enterprise. It uses a lot of advanced test automation technique which are actually available in SaaS based products and which is yet to make through in open source solutions. Supports both coded and codeless automation. So any member in your testing team, whether it's a manual or automation tester, can get into this tool and get started with automating their test cases. Why another test automation tool? So there are hundreds of open source and SaaS based products which are available, right? So why do you need another tool? Okay. The first problem is existing solutions are all fragmented. So a SaaS based product, if you take a look at it, so it tries to solve a specific problem, but now say if you automate your web application, you still have to depend on some other tool to test your APIs, or you still have to write your own test scripts to test the database. With EaselQA, all these options are built in and it is available within a single tool. So you don't have to bring in multiple tools to test various different features. There are advanced features such as image processing and identifying the image, and then let's say a UI test to feel or look at the objects just like how humans look at it, right? So even if your XPath or ID changes, you can still identify the element because of the way element looks and feel and its surrounding environment as well. I'll get into that in next session, how we try to tackle those so that you can exactly identify an element based on the neighboring surroundings around an element. Again, it's a low entry barrier for anybody who's willing to automate their test cases, right? So I mean, you have a lot of tools which you could record your UI test cases, but if you have to automate your database or any other messaging bus or any other tool within the enterprise, you have to go back and write the code for them. So that is where EaselQA comes into play, and we are really excited about this feature and will quickly demonstrate in our next subsequent sessions. So a lot of these other available tools helps you in creating the test cases and how do you go about it, but maintaining them becomes a problem after a point in time. So you have to start focusing on maintaining your test cases, which EaselQA takes care of it without any problem. Now let's talk about the advanced capabilities that EaselQA has. So I'll go with every single feature and then start explaining how the problem has been solved. So each solution have been solved in a unique way and in a specific way, right? So it's not a one solution which can fit all your problems. to solve all your problems. So let's get started with web application. What do we do with web application? How do we make it less maintainable, right? Comprehensive metadata capture. So what happens is when you record your test cases, or when the system interacts with any object or a web element, it kind of builds various different locators, not just say a single ID or a class name. It builds host of other information and tries to see what all possible ways an element can be identified. So, and along with this, we have a pretty powerful image processing engine, which has its own set of algorithms to identify the element around that environment. If, let's say, there are multiple checkboxes or multiple radio buttons, how do you identify or specifically say that, okay, you need this radio button, right? So EaselQA tries to handle that without much of a problem. Element identifier and scoring. So initially, when the test runs, it kind of scores the element, and whatever it finds as a best match, that would be scored a better way. As and when the test runs, it kind of keep providing these scores to various different locators, and after running this test multiple times, it would find a best, or the identifier which would be the best match or can be accessed quickly. So the system scores and keeps replacing these best matching element every single time the test is run. So that is where our auto healing feature comes into place, where you don't have to modify your identifiers every single time when something has changed. The system can automatically identify the changes and then update them within their object repositories. It has a pretty powerful OCR and image processing engine built in. We do provide advanced capabilities, such as, let's say, you have to identify an element in a grid or a table, where it would not always be the first element within the table. It could be somewhere in the fifth page of the element where you would, or sorry, fifth page of the table where you would navigate by clicking on next and then find an element. So all those features are available within EaselQA. It can be data driven as well. Now, if, let's say, you already have this, or an enterprise has invested heavily on building a test automation framework, and you don't want to move, and it is very difficult to move or just directly start utilizing a new tool in the market. So in that case, EaselQA can be replaced, or it can be used as just a replacement of POM object model, which is your page object model, where you would have defined what is the identifier of the element. So we do provide SDKs for Java, Python, and C Sharp. So with using these SDKs, you would replace Selenium with EaselQA Selenium, which is written on top of Selenium, but it helps you in accessing the element, or fetching those elements from EaselQA instead of your internal page object model, wherein it doesn't provide you, end user has to go and modify or update their page object model every time there is a change. Since you are using EaselQA, and EaselQA has this intelligence built in, it is all taken care, and you can write your test once and forget it. So there is absolutely very less maintenance there, and you can focus on your test coverage using the automation instead of maintaining your test automation scripts. Mobile application. So most of the features which were discussed for web are applicable for mobile as well. It still has metadata capture, and we are still working on scoring mechanism and auto healing for mobile applications. It has OCR and image processing, and we are working on these advanced components rather than simple elements, and come up with the unique solutions for each of these advanced components. Now, API testing. So it is very simple and easy to author API test cases. So all you have to do is upload your API documentation. It could be in a Swagger 2.0 or 3.0 format. Just upload the Swagger documentation into EaselQA, and it can identify all the APIs within the application this API documentation is imported into EaselQA, all these APIs are definitions are visible within the application, and you can just drag and drop into the canvas and start building your API test cases. We also provide plugins to import your test collections from tools such as Postman and then integrate within one single application. Since you have documentations uploaded into EaselQA, so it goes through all the metadata details, and it knows what is your input data type, input data and data type, and what is the expected output and output data type. So let's say if you are expecting an output which is supposed to be a string, and but it returns as an integer, right? So with this data validation information already available within EaselQA, it can easily flag this errors. This is really helpful when there are multiple applications integrated and they work together from an upstream to downstream. So let's say if an upstream API gets changed or changes its response. So usually in such cases, these kind of bugs would be identified later at the integrations changes, or during integration testing, I would say, right? So it usually these kind of test cases are very late in your test cycle. So these kind of errors can be caught very early in your test cycle. So the implicit validations is one of the powerful features which you can leverage. As I said, EaselQA provides a drag and drop canvas interface, and it also provides a pluggable interface where you can plug in any of the components that you have within your enterprise to be tested. You can visualize the test flow that is running, change management. Now, let's say if you have to change or a document, or let's say a API has changed, so instead of returning five, or instead of expecting, let's say, a three inputs, now the API has changed to just accept two inputs, or it wants more inputs to be added. Now, since the metadata is already built in or stored within EaselQA, now when you upload a new documentation, so EaselQA can efficiently identify the diff between earlier API request response and the new request response, and it can prompt you saying, okay, these are the test cases which are affected because of this new API changes. So you can train the system to make those initial few changes and then say, okay, apply this across all other changes. So that feature is also available within EaselQA. It takes off the pain of maintenance, right? So which we are really excited about. Versioning, so this is required now. Let's say, I mean, normally there would be different versions of APIs over a period of time. So now you have a production version v1 running in your production system, and there has to be a development going around v2, right? So the API signatures have completely changed. Now these APIs must affect only, or these should reflect only in your QA environment and do not touch the existing stage or production environment which still has the older API. So versioning is going to be a pretty helpful feature for a rapid development team. Database and microservices. So EaselQA stands out in this area where a lot of other tools still provide like API testing or web UI testing if you kind of expose it. But most of the database and microservices are still hosted on premise, and it's very difficult for enterprises to move them to public, right? So EaselQA can test this as well, and it again is using the simpler drag and drop canvas interface, right? So how do we solve this problem? Right? Now, EaselQA already supports multiple data sources, right? So it could be your databases, or it could be your queues or message bus. So right now it supports Oracle, Postgres, MySQL, Kafka, RabbitMQ, right? So the support is the development is still on to add various other sources. Now, we were like really excited when we started seeing the results of when chaining each of these components within the application. For example, we had a scenario where you create something in the UI that gets stored into the database. The message is sent on Kafka to another microservices which consumes that message and sends an email, and then finally we have to validate this email. Right, so this is a multi-step end-to-end feature which usually needs uh, developer level expertise to automate this stuff. EaselQA has covered it with just simple drag and drop UI interfaces. So it has components for all these mechanisms. You can keep chaining them one after the other to build any complicated test scenarios. As I said, you can create end-to-end test cases. Now, target testing of microservices. So in some cases, microservices exposes API for us to either send the input the data or see what is the output of the microservice, and also to see what is the status of microservice. It could be processing a long running job, but in most of the cases, microservices would always be or trying to it would be in a consumer model where it would be trying to read messages from your enterprise queues or say something like Kafka, right? So in that way, it's very difficult when something in these kind of scenarios, it's very difficult to write even your test cases if you want to write it using automation tools. So you would need to have extreme development expertise to handle these scenarios, right? So with these dedicated or exclusive functions and features that we have for each of these component, right? So within my same example now, let's say email service is trying to read an input from a Kafka topic and then trying to send out an email, right? So now EaselQA provides a block where you can drag and drop Kafka and then say you could just put it below actual initiator API or UI test case where it would generate this message. Immediately you can have this Kafka component trying to read the data of the Kafka to see if a counter has incremented, and you can also add a validation to test the type of data if it has arrived in Kafka. And then you can add some delay of say a 5 seconds or something, and then move on to see if that message has been arrived in your email inbox. Right, so all this kind of end-to-end scenario could be tested within EaselQA. It is completely codeless. Well, the main advantages, as I mentioned earlier, you could capture all these upstream changes when there is a interdependent services, and you could capture this very early in your testing stages. So this saves a lot of time. Installation and setup. So there are very little components required to install this. So the first one is a Chrome plugin. Again, it is a clickable URL. I'll share that in the description as well. So Chrome plugin is required to record your web test. You need Docker to be installed on your system. You also need a Docker Compose, and you can go ahead and download the Docker Compose file from the repository. Now, we have taken a conscious decision of not providing this as a single installer rather than build an entire uh, enterprise level architecture product, because each of these services are complicated or complex in its own, right? So you have a separate image processing engine, you have a engine which runs through the UI canvas and then parses through the graph and then tries to talk to each of those enterprise components. So all those things are not possible within single standalone desktop application, and scalability is going to be a bigger issue. So as we have some of the desktop applications, right, so you can install and try to code and try to cover all these things, but now if you have to scale them across, let's say, uh, multiple test cases or multiple parallel test cases, or if there are thousands of tests and you need to scale your system, the only way possible is to scale it vertically. Now with this Docker and Docker Compose, When you feel that, okay, now you have to scale it up since the usage is pretty high, you can just move it onto Kubernetes and it can run unbounded, right? So the limit is just the number of servers that you add. So we have taken this conscious decision of making sure it is scalable rather than uh, reaching a threshold or hitting a throttle after some point in time. Let's get started with setting up on your local instance. So all you have to do is head to this GitHub repository and then check out this on your local machine. So I have already checked this out, right? So let me take a pull again. Okay, so all I have to do is run this simple docker compose up command. Now I have shared the link for installing Docker and Docker Compose in the description. So it tries to pull all the containers that are required to run this application. So let's give it a few more seconds. About somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes depending on your internet speed and your system capability. So one thing that you would observe while running this Docker Compose command is you would see this decider service exiting every now and then. So this is because it waits for RabbitMQ server to be up and running. So once it is up and running, you can see this scrappy, you just have to see this table and then a decider service to be running. So this says your application is up and running now and you're all set to use. Just to download Chrome plugin. So EaselQA Chrome extension. You can download it from official Chrome store. And then you can just say add to Chrome, add extension. Okay. So once this is added, you can pin this plugin so that it's always visible, right? Now let's head back to our dashboard page, admin dashboard page, which we just set up right now. So once you run this Docker Compose up and if your services are up and running, you have to head on to your browser and then say localhost 4200. So this is where your tool gets initialized. I mean, you can access your tool. So for the first time, you have to go create a new account, right? So you can say what is your username. I would say Ravi Shankar, and then give a password, and then just say a Gmail something, and then register. So this would send you an email, but since we still have not configured email plugin, we'll get back to that on in a different video on how to set it up. But for now, you can directly go to home page and log in. So give the email address which you provided and then click on login. So here you go. You have landed into the EaselQA admin dashboard. So this is the place where you the page which you see for the first time. So all you have to do is create a project. So each application is segregated in a different project. Now let's say I would call it as demo project and then give a URL as a base URL, right? So the projects are visible here. Now once you enter into this project, you would have a dedicated dashboard available for the project. So there are all these options which are available for the projects. I will explain each of these features in my next subsequent videos. For now, let's do a simple web record and playback. So you can head back to this. Okay, so there's one more settings that is required, or one setting which is required, which is to configure your Selenium grid or Selenium server. So you can go to settings, click configure your Selenium server, and you will have to give your host IP address. So this has to be your IP address of the system and not localhost, because since you have seen in the demo or installation step, the application runs inside the Docker, right? So when you try to give localhost, it would try to access localhost within the container, so which is not accessible, right? So or there is no Selenium WebDriver running there. Now what you can do is you can say let me run a simple Selenium server, right? And also try to get its IP address. Okay. Now, if you want to be sure that this is your IP address, all you have to do is just go to this and then access the application using the IP address, and you must see EaselQA loading, right? So now all you have to do is just give the IP address and then give the port number where it's usually 4444 for Selenium Grid or Selenium Server. Just save this configuration. Now you can head back to EaselQA. So now, since this application can be running anywhere, either on-premise or on cloud or on different servers, you would have to give the server where the application is running. So you can either give the IP address or yeah, just give a local host since everything is within your system. But we highly recommend that you give a accessible IP address, and then the email address that we used for login, and then the password. There you go. Now you're all set to record your test case. Now there are these three options: record test, playback, and then log out. So do not playback test cases from this plugin. There is a reason. We'll explain that again in our next videos. We'll show where to play back the test cases. Now let me just record a simple test case. Okay, this is a demo project application which I created, and let's say I want to add a sample sign up feature. I want to create test cases under sign up feature. Alright, so let me call it as simple sign up. Now this launches a separate browser window. I'll just run a simple test where I would just give a name and email and sign up. Now, if you take a look at it, there is a gray border around every element that I select. This is because for users to know which element that you're interacting with. Subscribe. All right. Now let me head back to the test cases and see what happens in the dashboard. So you could see the test cases being recorded here, and it has also recorded all the steps. So let me just go through the steps one by one. The first one is your metadata. As I explained in the video earlier, so it tries to capture various different element locators, right? So it just got the entire attribute and also the possible route through which you can access this element. And the next one is the image itself, right? So it has clearly looked at which image to interact with, and it also gives you a snapshot of the image and the entire page image as well, right? So this is really helpful in processing the UI from a visual perspective and then trying to access this element. And it's the same for and then finally a button, right? So you can also see what was the steps that it ran. Right? Now you can also see the text view of what happened, what really happened in your test case, right? So it just gives you a brief textual information. Now let's go back to running this test, right? So you can run this test by clicking on this play button here. It asks which browser that you want to run against, and just click run. So this would talk to the Selenium server which is running on your local and then launch this browser application. That's it. So hope you feel this tutorial is easy to understand on what is EaselQA, why EaselQA is required, and how to set up. In our next tutorials, we'll go through with what is object repository, data platforms, and then reports and API spec, and our exciting UI, which is the canvas layer where you can plug and play all these components and then create the complicated, extensive complicated scenarios and cover all possible scenarios end to end. Hope you find this useful. Please reach out to us if you need any help or support. So you can reach out to us at support@dataphion.com. It's support at dataphion.com. And we are also looking out for contributors to contribute to this repository, and it can be in the way of documentation or testing this application and making it more stable, and then also coming up with scenarios that you would want to see implemented in this application. Looking forward to hear from you all. Thank you.